Guess what's not gonna match the thumbnail? The way that I look. Hello lovelies, this is my very delayed 1000 subscriber thank you video. Obviously we're talking about Marilyn today, and I've literally been filming this the entire day. It is 7 o'clock at night right now. When I say the entire day, I mean from 6 in the morning, so I'm quite tired. My face is melted off, so I guess you'll understand why I had to retake the pictures. This is 30 pages of a script, and I don't know how long these two videos are going to be. Huge, massive thank you. Also again, thank you to Tiffany for shouting me out. The amount of work I've poured into this has probably concerned my husband a bit, honestly. Marilyn has definitely been a person that I have had an affinity for since before I even knew who she was. Like, I don't even know the origin story for like the first time I knew of Marilyn, which I guess is kind of like a reflection on her life as well, since she was so mysterious and private about her past too. You could say I'm a bit of a fan. I've poured every waking moment of my life into this, and I really hope that you like this because she was just ever present in everyone's lives. Like, everyone was always aware of her, even if you didn't really know anything about her. Now look at Yara's video, which I will link down below for reasons as to why, because some people just decided to sort of sell her out in a way. Because hey, guess what? Most of her life was kind of as a product to people. And so we're going to be talking about the things that actually happened in her life. We talk about the big picture, the bigger issues, and like the implications, and in particular I think that Marilyn has had like a very big impact on our lives in many different ways, but I'm not going to tell you everything she ate for breakfast, lunch and dinner, okay? Or even coffee, because she didn't drink coffee, she drank tea and milk. There are huge trigger warnings for this video, but if you know Marilyn's life, you'll be well expecting them. Miscarriage, addiction, overdose, suicide, abuse, self-harm, abortion, being institutionalized forcefully, and generally scary mental health struggles, stalking, breaking and entering, and child molestation. So they're throughout the whole video, so honestly please be warned, take care of your mental fitness first, because you know that I want to talk about the truth of her life here, and honestly there's a lot of darkness in it, but of course there is light, and I will have resources for you down below as well, because I don't want you to cry as many times as I did whilst working on this. Let's get right on into it. Her childhood, chapter 1. So Gladys Baker named her third child Norma Jean after a child that she used to look after. Now originally she gave her the same surname as like another husband with Mortensen, but changing it to an E, but then she changed it back to be Baker. Gladys's first husband, Mr. Baker, he was actually really abusive to her, and he actually took her first two children away from her as well. Marilyn actually describes this in her own memoir as her mother spending all her savings trying to get the children back, but then seeing how happy her children were and what a good life they were leading without her, it was like the mother from the movie Stella Dallas. She went away to give them a happier life than she actually could have. Gladys's father had also been taken away to die in a mental institute. Her grandmother had also been taken off there, screaming and crazy, and her brother killed himself, and there were other family ghosts. These are Marilyn's words, not mine. I want to remind everyone that this was in the 1910s. This is in the time of institutionalism, where lobotomies were still happening, torture was like terrible. Basically, if you had any mental health issues, you got treated really badly. I can't even explain how big of a stigma there was around mental illness as well. There was also a fear in families because this was hereditary, and we actually do know from the science that things can get passed down from generation to generation. I'm so glad I'm not having children. Gladys was actually very unlucky in love, and also from a family who didn't really care for her. Her own mother made her get married at the age of 15 as well because she didn't want her anymore. Norma Jean Baker was born on the 1st of June 1926, and it will actually be her 100th birthday before we know it. But you know, Gladys was abandoned by her lovers, including this man named Gifford, who we'll be coming back to a lot. And while she tried to care for Norma Jean, it was also a struggle. She moved in with this family called the Bollender family. Ida and Wayne were their first names, and they both desperately wanted children, but they couldn't have them, so they'd actually opened up their home to foster children, and they'd done that for 35 years over their life. Gladys actually worked nights, but being a single mother was just too much for her. She ended up leaving Norma Jean at the Bollender house. I actually really quickly just want to chat around the expectations of motherhood and how toxic it really is, because apparently it's one thing that all women are naturally meant to be able to want to do and just have this natural affinity for. And of course, you're a failure if you're not maternal or if you're struggling. Whilst things are kind of beginning to change here, it's also like not really though. Like, I get asked about when I'm having kids. I can't have kids. It's just a thing that people think is acceptable to ask women when they get married, even if they don't get married. Just, oh, you'll make such a good mother and all this stuff. Boys don't get asked about being a father. In my opinion, it's 100% okay if people aren't cut out to be mothers. Like I said, some people aren't naturally maternal. We shouldn't keep forcing people to try and fit like these some societal norms about like what's natural. So this was in like the 1910s and 1920s when Gladys had her children, and especially back then gender norms were just so rigid. It must have actually been a huge struggle for Gladys to actually admit that she couldn't cope and actually pass Norma Jean over to the Bollinger family. And so I personally find this really admirable that she tried to do what was right for Norma Jean, and I don't hold it against her at all. Now, things that she did later on down the line I've got a huge problem with, but this I don't think that anyone should look down on her for. Back to our raggedy starlet. One day Ida and Wayne, after she called Ida Mama, they snapped and said to her, "You're old enough to know better. I'm not related to you in any way. You just bought here. Your mama's coming to see you tomorrow. You can call her Mama if you want to." And this confused Norma Jean no end, and she would yell at her for being too noisy even for reading a book. So Marilyn spent most of her time that she had to be with Gladys, like on the weekends, just holding her breath trying to be quiet. I don't know if you ever did this as a child too, or like just hiding in a closet, hiding away, because like her mother wouldn't even let her read. She was being too loud all the time, so she was super scared. On one of the visits though, Gladys actually pointed out a picture that was hanging on the wall of Charles Stanley Gifford. Told you, keep remembering that name, okay? This was the man that had cruelly abandoned Gladys, like awfully. But he was suspected to be Marilyn's father, according to Gladys. Even though there was no proof of it, no one's ever proven this, and even to his deathbed, he won't even admit to it. Gladys told Norma Jean that this was her father that she saw on the wall, and this filled Norma Jean with quote-unquote great warmth, and he reminded her of Clark Gable, and this started off a fascination that literally lasted her whole lifetime. Like, she idolized Clark Gable. I can't even express how much she loved him. Marilyn's childhood wasn't the worst. Like, it got really warped by the media and also by Fox wanting to really have like this image of this beautiful, hopeless, glamorous starlet just being plucked out of like this terrible, terrible life. Now, it wasn't the best life either, but Fox really peddled this story, and then Norma Jean also wanted to fill into it, and the public desperately wanted this as well, because there's nothing that people love more than an underdog that's been suffering, and then people can feel like white knights for plucking her out of obscurity and then like celebrating her, but then objectifying her, and then also spending the rest of her life being torn down by those same people. But the thing that I really want to emphasize here is the fact that she didn't really know who she belonged to. She spent most of her childhood very confused, hopping from place to place to place. Like, I'm not even listing every single place that she stayed at, because it was for short periods of time and just getting handed around. So she felt like an orphan. She got treated like an orphan. And because of the clothes that she wore, people called her an orphan. The Bollinger house was actually quite strict, and they were very Christian, like everything must be done this way, that way. So she was naturally an unsure and scared girl. So all of this uncertainty and just being told off by everyone would of course have a huge impact on her, which, you know, kind of affected her whole life, honestly. So in 1933, Gladys actually took Norma Jean back when she was 8 and moved in with the Atkinson family and their adult daughter. Like, this was a much more of a free household, and this was honestly fascinating to Norma Jean. She could finally go and see movies, like, and see people like her idol, Jean Harlow. At school, she was actually asked if she was an orphan, as nobody would like consistently come and pick her up, and she was just confused and was just like, I guess so. And then everyone bullied her, of course. So Gladys actually bought the house against the advice of the Atkinsons, so they moved in with her to be able to help with the payments. She furnished it as well, including that grand piano that's become like this item that everyone knows Marilyn for. But then one of her first children died, Robert Jasper Baker, at 15 of tuberculosis, and she screamed at tiny Norma Jean saying, "Why couldn't it be you?" And she spiraled into a deep anxiety and depression, and she was back and forth to the hospital, and then she finally got committed in 1935, but no one actually told Norma Jean this, so she thought her mother had died. And everything from the house had to get sold, obviously to pay off all of Gladys's debts as well. Grace McKee petitioned to be guardian of the estate and to keep Norma Jean with the Atkinson family to not like disturb her. Now during this time, so there was a man that went to church called Mr. Kimmel, and he actually got Marilyn into his room and he molested her when she was 9 or 10 years old, and she was freaking out about this and ran out to tell her quote-unquote aunt, who scolded her for like saying such things about such a nice man, like the boarder that was there called Mr. Kimmel. And it's like, This incident actually affected her deeply her whole life and started this stutter that took years for her to be able to get over. In 1935, she then went to the Los Angeles orphans' house, which this is inspired by. But she went there against her knowledge and will. The orphanage wasn't actually bad or anything, but you just have to remember how people were treated back then if you were an orphan. And same as like how her childhood had been, and this was kind of like rock bottom to her, having to go to an orphanage. But then in 1936, Grace actually got her out, and she and her sister Enid encouraged Norma Jean to be an actress because she was so pretty. In 1937, she had to move in with her aunt Oleg Monroe until a flood hit, and then in 1938 she moved in with Edith Anna Lower, who we'll just call Anna from now on. She was a Christian Scientist like Norma Jean's mother, so Marilyn was already aware of this stuff, but this is when Marilyn started to get incredibly painful periods. But guess what's not allowed in that religion? Medicine. Yeah, so they tried to pray the pain away, and it didn't work. Big shocker. But then in 1939 she started to fill out, and her dull orphan blouses, which she only had 2 of, they were ripped, so she had to borrow one of her quote-unquote sister's sweaters. And then suddenly everyone started taking notice of her, because even at 12 years old she had the body of a 17-year-old, her own words. And of course she got harassed too, because hey, what else are you going to do to a child? And then her Aunt Anna started to help her by darkening her brows and wearing some red lipstick. And so her little Norma Jean started to build some confidence. She would also read aloud to try and like mimic Ginger Rogers in order to fix that stutter which happened from that traumatic experience. Then in 1940 she moved back in with Grace Goddard and her husband Doc, hence her name change. But she was typically alone, people watching and just daydreaming unless there were boys wanting to date her, because there were a lot of those. But Grace was neighbours with the Dohertys, and you'll recognise that surname. And when she turned 15, since his old girlfriend rejected his proposal, and the Goddards didn't want to take her with them to West Virginia, they suggested, why don't you marry Jim, the nice neighbour? Married Dullness. So he was 20 and was apprehensive, but he liked the idea of saving her, a very common theme throughout her romantic life. It brought me neither happiness nor pain. It was like being retired to the zoo. So they married on the 19th of June in 1942, and he was 20. She dropped out of school then too, which was actually a big regret for her, which is one of the reasons why she kept on really trying to study the rest of her life and try and better herself, because some people, they just kind of judge you if like you're not a typical kind of smart. Oh my gosh, we're still living in that world. She didn't really have life skills, and they fought a lot because they didn't really know how to communicate. Like after a fight she would run out into the road in like her bedclothes, and then like men would follow her. Like she threatened to jump off the Santa Monica Pier. When it wasn't dull, things were volatile. Gladys interfered at many points of Norma Jean's life, and this was no exception. She started to just pop up randomly, as you'll hear. Like, she should have really stayed away. Like, look, that's my opinion, you're entitled to your own. I think that she should have just stayed away. Honestly, because anytime that she gets involved with Marilyn's life later on, it actually just causes pain. But this time she actually decided to tell Marilyn her father's real name. She says it's Charles Stanley Gifford. So guess what Norma Jean does? She's super excited and calls him up, and he hangs up on her, leaving her absolutely heartbroken, feeling abandoned, feeling all of those feelings that she felt from all of those years of being pushed away to different people. Like, what did you expect from a man who abandoned you so cruelly? Like, seriously, did you think that he would just go welcoming in a daughter into his life when he would just think that you're doing that for money? Like, come on. Anyway, in 1943, along with all of the dullness that was happening in their marriage, Norma Jean actually saw a cow getting rained on outside and it looked really sad, so she was like, I need to save it, and so she tried to bring it into the house, and Jim caught her and was like, what the hell are you doing? She's like, it's getting wet outside, it's cold, like the poor cow. She had this worry for animals and like vulnerable humans her whole life. Seriously, it's just a running theme. Now Jim actually got enlisted to join the war effort, so they moved to Catalina Island, where men apparently quote unquote couldn't help but stare. Mate, you can. You just like to objectify people. I'm sorry. You can control where you look. Like, she was also really scared of having a baby because there were a lot of miscarriages and stillbirths that ran through her family as well, so she was very worried about this. But she did want to have kids in the future, but as soon as she found out that Jim was going to be going overseas, she begged him to make her pregnant, which He refused because it just wouldn't be wise, but she was like, I just don't want to be alone. Being alone is not a reason to have children. If you cannot be in your own company, you probably shouldn't be bringing children into this world. Sorry, that's my hot take there. So whilst Jim was off overseas like serving his country, she started working at radiophone thanks to a connection from Jim Joe's mother. But like, she was a really bad typist at like 35 words per minute was as fast as she could go, and so they decided to just get her like painting the parachutes. It was like a 10-hour work day on her feet, but she loved doing work because it distracted her from how lonely she was. Until one day some photographers came to visit radiophone. David Conover actually returned to get more pictures of her, and she could get $5 an hour working as a model, which is way easier, way more fun than like doing this heavy labor work. And she really wanted to be able to buy her mother's grand piano back. Jim apparently didn't mind her modeling, he just didn't want her to get into drinking. He was doing that anyway, as well as gambling, so I'm sorry, pot. Shut up about the kettle over here. Now the thing that happened here was that Marilyn kept on getting gigs to be able to like avoid spending time with her husband because like she didn't love him, and she was dead set on having a career. And this career was honestly giving her like this confidence boost that she never actually had. And then she had the photo shoot with William Carroll, which you'll probably be familiar with, this one. And he commented that she had no quote-unquote model clothes, but she also had like this complete lack of professionalism and just wanting to like get involved to make sure the pictures were as good as possible. Always asking like, if I'm doing anything wrong, like to be readjusted. Like, she had such a drive to succeed. In 1944, or around then, met and wrote to Bernice Baker, her half-sister that she discovered that she had, and they became good friends that would last a lifetime. In 1945, she finally went to the Blue Book Agency, saying that she was 20, not 19, and she took it really seriously, like studying her pictures, always trying to be better, like looking in the mirror, making sure that she knew her angles and everything. Like, she was really like focused on being able to use this as her way to success. Just a quote from her. I used to meet a lot of wolves amongst the buyers. I didn't have much trouble brushing them off. I found if I looked sort of stupid or pretended I didn't know what they were talking about, they'd soon give up in disgust. It's nice to know some things haven't changed. She would drive herself to and from the photo shoots as well as like another layer of protection. She knew from like the age of 12 what men were really like, so she just knew like different ways to try and protect herself, which, you know, hey, the victim just always has to protect themselves, don't they? Great. So in Christmas 1945, she had like this multi-day photo shoot booked with a photographer, but Jim was actually coming home and she was like, I'm still gonna go to work. So she did. Much to Jim's dismay, he hated her for this. But like the photo shoot was like plagued with issues with car troubles, her things getting stolen, people harassing her. The photographer, Andre Dedienne, asked her, do you love your husband? To which she replied, no. Like, she felt like he was forced into marrying her to save her, effectively, just being passed on because no one else wanted her, so I don't really think that this marriage could have ever lasted anyway. Then in 1946, she finally did what the agency had been telling her to do and got her hair lightened and straightened as well. And she also started to try and get into doing screen tests, which, you know, her husband had to find out by himself. And what did he tell her when he found out? You shouldn't even bother. Now, the screen test that she was initially invited on was actually a lie, but you know, like, she managed to kick and punch her way out of that situation, which is really good. But you know, she carried on modeling, and on the 26th of April, like, she appeared on the cover of Family Circle magazine, which actually is like a big deal. And on that day, she wrote a list of reasons as to why she wanted to divorce Jim. And this was all whilst he had actually gone overseas, but he had written her a letter, we can give it one more try if you want. And it's like, well, clearly you don't want. She wrote, my husband didn't support me, he embarrassed me, he ridiculed me and treated me like a child. There are reasons for why you want to get a divorce, right? So she got really close with her agent, Harry Lipton, and he helped her get to Las Vegas. For some reason she had to like live somewhere else in order to be able to get the divorce. She stayed with Grace's friend called Minnie Willett, and she was a very well connected person in Las Vegas. And she walked out of her house one day to see a friend talking to Bill Purcell. Then they went for a walk and had some dinner together, and he actually became like this long-term friend relationship thing. She started getting recognized from all the pinup pictures that she had been doing, and she actually sent the divorce papers to Jim whilst he was at sea. Then all he did to her was like cut off the money. It was just like, this is your punishment. And when he got on dry land overseas, he called her up and she's like happily picking up the phone, hi Bill, and it was him. and he just like yelled at her. He was super angry, and then she scolded him for like cutting off the money like while she was in hospital, like leaving her just in the lurch. And of course Gladys popped up yet again at Aunt Anna's house and stayed with her and Norma Jean. It was a really tense situation, as you could well imagine. I mean, Norma Jean barely knew Gladys, and Gladys disapproved of her. Jim went over there to pick up a key from Norma Jean whilst Bill was actually there, and Bill describes this look that she gave him. It was just like this cold, dead, calculated, like whatever, kind of like you're dead to me sort of look, which he kind of held in his little cerebellum back here, and he was like, because he saw that look later on in their life as well. This is the end of Norma Jean. I also want to remind you, it was at the Blue Book agency that they started to teach her like how to smile properly, because no one wanted to hire her because she smiled like this. Rosie needs to smile like this and show your lower teeth. So if you ever notice Marilyn like moving her lips a lot, that's why. They did put white as her concealer colour underneath her eyes, in case you're wondering why this is so stark. So on the 24th of August 1946, she signed a contract with 20th Century Fox, but her name wasn't quote-unquote star quality. Ben Leon said that she reminded him of Marilyn Monroe, and Monroe was her personal choice, and she wrote, "This is the end of Norma Jean" in lipstick on her mirror that night. On the 30th of September, her divorce was finalised, and Gladys went elsewhere. Marilyn decided to live on her own for the first time. She kept on being overlooked for roles, but her popularity was soaring. She was getting recognised everywhere. She saw what happened to the other girls who made love nest after love nest, her words, in order to be able to try and get ahead, but she held out because she actually wanted to get like better opportunities that were more long lasting. And yes, she did say this famous quote in her memoir: "In Hollywood, a girl's virtue is much less important than her hairdo. You're judged by how you look, not by what you are. Hollywood's a place where they'll pay you $1,000 for a kiss and 50 cents for your soul." I know, because I turned down the first offer often enough and held out for the 50 cents. Like, people used to sell her for $5 a week as an orphan in her mind. Some men who tried to buy her, like, honestly just made her sick. She'd go around with the wolves and get fed and shown off, but her clothes were really cheap. Like, she was wearing a $10 dress to where everyone else was wearing like really fancy clothes and stuff, and it's like, hi, relatable, we've all been there. I've definitely been there. She'd hide runs in her stockings, and her clothes always felt really shabby, which probably explains why she wanted to dress as beautifully as she did later on. Men used to try and trick her, saying that they weren't expecting anything from her and they just wanted to buy her things and take her home, but like nothing would happen. And she said, "I don't like men with fancy schemes like you. I like straightforward wolves better, but I'm always nervous around liars." She would still go around with them to restaurants for the chance to meet other well-connected wolves, and she never felt bad about like quote-unquote eating her head off either, because food wasn't part of the purchase price. Oh my god, I love her. Bit part beauty. So with this rise in popularity, Fox was like, okay, fine, we'll start giving you like little bit parts, whatever. She did get an uncredited role in Scudder Who, Scudder Hey, but that ended up on the cutting room floor, and then also in Dangerous Years. It was also now that she'd met her makeup artist, Alan Whitey Snyder, and she actually kept him as her makeup artist up until she died. She even asked him to do her makeup when she died as well, which he did do, and he was also pallbearer at her funeral. Marilyn went to lessons at the Actors Lab. She was so keen to learn as much as she possibly could. "I knew how third rate I was. I could actually feel my lack of talent as if it were cheap clothes I was wearing inside. But my god, how I wanted to learn, to change, to improve. I didn't want anything else, not men, not money, not love, but the ability to act." And she also took acting lessons under Helena Sorrell as well, who was 20th Century Fox's acting teacher. So basically Fox would send the girls to all of the places where you'd find like the well-connected people, like from being girls to encourage gambling to golf courses and stuff. And actually while she was at one of these golf courses, she met Lucille Ryan, who was the talent scout for MGM, and then she also met Lewis Carroll. Now you might probably know those names. And these two actually became really helpful figures in her life as well, especially because just afterwards, Fox dropped her, and like she just cried, but then she set her jaw and just carried on. She's like, okay, fine, I'm gonna find somewhere else to work. During this time, her money absolutely plummeted, and during this time she neglected her social life. She just basically was doing whatever she could to try and get ahead. She was learning as much as possible, she was being involved with as much as possible, and you know, just dealing with depression because hey, that's fun. Oh, and also there are like a lot of rumors during this time. No, she didn't become pregnant and sell her baby, and no, she didn't become a cool girl either. She did, however, have a terrifying incident that would like change everything for her and make her even more anxious than she actually was. A wolf at the window. So she got her final paycheck from Fox, and this meant that she could actually buy presents for people and also eat, which was kind of a big deal. But in her excitement she forgot to cash it, and so she was trying to find somewhere to go because the banks were all closed on this day. But then a handy policeman just came by to help her. He was like, "Oh, what do you need, miss?" And she's like, "I need to cash this check." And so they go to a store. She has to write down her details on the back of the check, and then boom, she gets the money and she can go home. Now, she'd been dealing with some sleeping issues, so she'd already gone to the doctor and she picked up her prescription for some sleeping pills. So she'd taken that, and then during the night she got woken up by her screen bedroom like door getting like slashed through by someone, and she was absolutely terrified. She tried to imitate her man, but the intruder didn't stop, just started chasing her, and she ran out into the street wearing her tiny nightie because guess what? None of her neighbours would help her. It took ages for her to find someone that she could actually use their phone to call the police. The police turned up like an hour later, and they told her not to worry, you scared him off, they never come back twice. And then at 1 AM, whilst the police were still there, a big knock happened at her door, and it was a screen cutter who tried to grab at her, and then he was just like trying to play it off like they were old friends. "Ah, Marilyn's an old friend here. Now let's have the truth, Miss Monroe. Is this man an old sweetie of yours?" Of course, you know, victim blaming, like has anything changed? "He's no burglar, he knows your name." And then they were just like searching him, and they found a police issue gun. And they found like a card from the LAPD police. So guess who it was? It was that same guy that was helping her cash a check. Yeah, can we trust anyone? What's that 4-letter saying again? So the detectives visited the next day, and they were so apologetic, saying that he was new and had a 14-month-old baby, blah blah, like that excuses anything, I'm sorry, what the hell. And they also asked not to press charges because it would give the force a black eye. One of your people intruded on a woman's house during the night with a knife. Who knows what the hell would have happened to her? But you know, Marilyn, ever the sweetheart, was like, I would like to be sure that he didn't try to do that to me or any other girl. And she didn't press charges. I mean, like, you've got policemen intimidating you, like, what do you think is going to happen? So she didn't press charges, nothing's changed, victim blaming still happens. A new face. So it was after this incident that she actually moved in with Lucille Ryan, that we talked about before, the MGM's talent scout, and John Carroll. They'd also actually been helping her with money during this time as well. After that incident, she never felt okay alone and was always wary about like anyone like breaking into her house. All of this reminded her just how abandoned she was as a child. And so when she actually moved in with them, they managed her money, with 10% of it still going to her agent. So during this time, she met
Joseph Schenck,
who's a name that you might be able to like recognize if you know anything about vintage Hollywood. Okay, so during this time she spent a lot of time at
Joseph Schenck's house.
He had like an amazing cook, and like she was obviously still really hungry. She couldn't really afford very much. Like she would spend all of her money on lessons to like better herself because, you know, it's kind of what she had to be able to do. And of course, like, the upkeep of being a woman is not cheap. So he wanted to marry her, but she refused, but they did manage to stay friends. But the thing is that he likes to deny that this ever happened. He's like, no, I never proposed to Marilyn. And it's like, oh, come on. Who are we gonna believe? The person that got propositioned to all the time, or the person whose ego it would hurt to get turned down by Marilyn Monroe? And through this relationship with Schenck, she got to know Harry Cohn. And then through him, she got to know Natasha Lytess. A person that we don't like on this channel, okay? Just a heads up, we don't like her. He wanted her to do some acting classes for Marilyn, and Natasha hated her initially, like absolutely hated her. Saying that she was apologetic in her manner, in a I know I'm not good enough but I'll try kind of way. They did an audition piece for They Knew What They Wanted, which is a terrible movie name, come on. And finally, Columbia actually signed her in 1948. And during this time, Aunt Anna passed away, who was one of Marilyn's only supporters, which like just devastated her. And after just doing one film for them, The Ladies of the Chorus, she got dropped by Columbia. Then we get on to talking about Johnny Hyde, a 50-something-year-old from William Morris. He fell really hard for her too, even though he was married. And he convinced her to drop her agent for him, and he actually believed in her, according to her. Though others really had believed in her before now, but of course, like, when you've got like this notion in your mind, you're just gonna be inclined to think like that instead. He helped her like more strictly look after her time and schedule it, because before she would just whittle away the hours. Like, she was already studying before, but he like just turned it up into like overdrive. He got her reading, studying classical music, and living by a schedule in order to take it to the next level. He became like a protected her and then a lover. Johnny did actually leave his wife for Marilyn when she could fully go under his wing, and she spent many nights at his place, and he begged her to marry him. He asked her, like, what do you have to lose? Like, everyone wanted this to happen. They're just like, just marry him, you'll be rich then, and then you'll be fine. What do you have to lose? Myself, I only marry for one reason, love. And he was also the person to get her the plastic surgery. It's true, she did have plastic surgery, but it's not on her nose. Like, there's no proof that she ever had nose surgery, even though everyone's like, look at the difference, and it's like, it's literally the same nose from a different angle with like different contouring skills. So she had some work done on her chin, and then she also had like a prosthesis in her jaw to soften her profile as well. And also she had an amazing makeup artist that made her look the way that she did, because she looked very different in real life in comparison to like how she looked in the pictures. In the Nude, examples of how women get treated terribly, no matter what they do. In 1949, Marilyn fell on incredibly hard financial times again. She'd only made one starring role in a B-grade movie, which she didn't make much money from, and in the past she'd gotten into a car crash on the way to an audition where she didn't have any money, and that was how she met this photographer called Tom Kelly. He had been begging her to pose nude for him, and she had refused up until now. However, because she was in this terrible financial situation, he called her up, even though other accounts say that she called him up. And obviously I can't show the pictures here, but they're very easy to find online. She just asked that his partner actually was present at the photo shoot, and she did it. And she got $50 for it, which made a massive difference. It meant that her car could get fixed, because that's the reason that she was in such a dire financial state, because she needed to be able to get her car fixed to be able to go from place to place, because guess what? Hollywood is not easy to get around, especially if you are an actress like trying to get ahead, because you have to go from audition to audition to audition, which is across the whole city. I fully understand why she actually needed to do this, but the thing is that she never felt ashamed about doing it until later on, and she confided in Bill Purcell afterwards and showed him the pictures, and he said that they're really tasteful. And it's like, I've seen them, like we saw them when we went to the Sex Museum in Amsterdam, and it's very tasteful. They do have a life-size figure of her there though. Oh, she also signed it under the name Marilyn Monroe to try and get away from it, and it's like subtle, yeah, like no one's gonna guess that. Okay, so the thing is, for me, right, the people want a product from other people, and so the people over here make the product for the people over here, but then the people over here blame the people over here for doing the work that they want these people to do, and it's always these people that are getting blamed for doing the work that these ones are paying for and want them to do. And it's like, well, why are you on such a moral high horse? You're the ones that are demanding this, so what the hell? Seriously. So this had such an impact on her career that, you know, like that iconic pink dress, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes? Well, that was originally going to be this beautiful sequin dripping in diamonds, like see-through number, but that was too risky for the movie. So they designed the pink dress to be frumpy on her. And the thing is that, like, a potato sack couldn't look frumpy on Marilyn, but they fully designed that pink dress to be too big and shapeless on her, to make it less sexy on her, in a movie that was all about how sexy she was. Same as most of her movies were. Like, the Puritanism nature of America really boggles my mind sometimes. It really does. Lovesick, Happy Tour. So she was deeply in love with a piano player at the time, and it was the first person that she'd ever actually loved. She writes about this in her memoir as well. And she finally managed to discover the joys of sex, because previously that had never actually happened. Although the thing is that he was brand new divorced and super bitter and just like, oh, like obnoxious basically, and was very dismissive of Marilyn. Now, in her memoir, Marilyn didn't actually want to say his name. Comment down below if you know it. It didn't end well, as you could probably guess it wouldn't. His bitterness just meant that he didn't fight for her at all. And this was even after she bought him a $500 piece of jewelry on credit when she only had like less than $2 to her name. When she gave it to him, like super happy, he said, but it's not engraved. Why doesn't it say to blah from Marilyn? What an ungrateful brute, right? She said, because you'll leave me someday, and he didn't say no. To love without hope is a sad thing for the heart. It took her over 2 years to be able to pay off that piece of jewelry that he kept. So she actually met Lester Cohen after finding out that they needed someone for a part in this movie called Love Happy. So this had Groucho and Harpo Marx in it, which are two names that you'll probably know. this is disgusting, but Groucho wanted to know if she could walk by me in such a manner to arouse my elderly libido and cause smoke to come out of my ears. So she demonstrated her walk. Their comment was, it's Mae West, Theda Bara and Bo Peep all rolled into one. Because of course comparing women is the only way that you can actually like figure out who they actually are, right? So after the movie Love Happy, she actually went on like this 5-week tour around the place as well. Of course, she barely had any clothes. And she called Cohen about it and he gave her some money, and so she's like, okay, we're going to Chicago and New York. They're like northern states, they're really cold. So she bought 3 wool suits. That was a mistake. And so she was just absolutely melting the whole time. They even like use this as like part of their plot as well, because as she was sweating they had her holding ice creams that were melting, like, and they always tried to get her to be cooling down. She refers to this as the exploitation tour in her memoir, and it makes sense as to why. It was honestly an exhausting junket where she was hounded for pictures, not only like staged ones but also from the public, because her popularity had only grown. Like, remember our dear friend Bill Purcell? And so she called him up saying that she wanted to throw acid in her face to make it stop. Does anybody else get flashbacks to 2007 with Britney? Because I definitely did when I read about this. Marilyn was feeling like this at 23, at nowhere near the level of popularity that she would actually hit. And Britney did that after 10 years of being hounded in like the most invasive ways. Like, Marilyn had people propositioning her all the time, never knowing who to trust. This was a consequence of 1 minute on screen. That's it. She was only in that role for a minute. Just imagine the future for Marilyn. She was purely seen as a sex object, not an actress, and least of all a person. Unrequited Love. You won't believe me if I told you this took me about an hour to try and make a faux bob, and I know it looks not at all accurate, but I really did try. And then we got onto the movie The Asphalt Jungle. Thanks to Johnny Hyde at MGM, it convinced them that yes, she's absolutely a rising star, she's just got something different about her, and look, she's gorgeous. But when she went there, like, you know that whole imposter syndrome, it kind of made her freeze up and then she couldn't even talk. And then she's like, do you mind if I read this lying down? Because this was a reclining role, as you'll be able to see. And so she's like, they're like, yep, sure, whatever, like, lie on the floor, that's cool. And she did wonderfully, and there you had it, she had the part. And the thing is that she was so happy about this because she knew that this wouldn't actually be able to get cut out like what happened to her in the past. And when the movie was playing, she loved all the wolf whistles in particular that she got when she came on screen, and she was like, I know I'm gonna kill this. Gotta love that internalized male gaze and misogyny. And Johnny really tried to get MGM to sign her, but they were still convinced that she wasn't photogenic enough, so there you go. So instead, he started his own crusade to try and get her hired, and while she was at home, she was studying her hardest. And she came across this book that she got incredibly fascinated with, the autobiography of Lincoln Steffens. Now, you may not know about him, but he was kind of like a radical leftist, and she loved this book. She loved his life, and she carried on reading about him. He knew all about the poor people and about injustice. He knew about the lies people used to get ahead and how smug rich people sometimes were. My little heart is just beating right now. Oh my gosh, amazing. We've tried, haven't we? I don't think I need to. I think we've tried, we've done enough. All about Marilyn. Did you know that Marilyn loved to wear a terry cloth towel like any time that she could? She even took interviews in them, and honestly I can understand why. This is way more comfy, except when you're in heading into summer in New Zealand. This is very hot. So Johnny Hyde actually got her this gig at 20th Century Fox, and it may be a little movie that you could have heard of called All About Eve. If you haven't watched it, please just go and do it, because it is so good. Now, they were trying to get her to go to all these fancy cafes with stars, trying to say that there were illicit affairs happening, and she just didn't want a bar of it, basically. Because in the same way that that still happens with stars today, she's like, I really couldn't care less. Like, to Marilyn, faking love was the same as like a person trying to fly. It's like, it's that level of impossible. Now, remember that book that we were just talking about? Mr. Mankiewicz actually asked her what she was reading, and she told him, and he's like, don't you dare tell anyone that you're reading that book. People will start to think of you as a radical. And it's like, what, this person that just wants to make sure that everyone's taken care of? Yeah, no. And of course he mentioned communists because, you know, the Red Scare. This was of that time in America where everyone was like, they're gonna start taking away our freedoms. Oh wait, are we still there? I kind of feel like we're still there with you. I don't really know, I don't live in America. But from an outsider's observation, I think that we're still very much there. And he's like, do you not keep up with the news? Do you not read the newspaper? And to her, she's like, well, I only read the parts of the newspaper that I want to read. So clearly she wasn't actually all that aware of like exactly how dire this whole state was in America and the fact that there was a war that happened because of it. Of course, we're leading up to that war. Hopefully not in about right now. She wrote the name at Lincoln Steffens on a list that she was asked to provide of like the 10 greatest men in the world, and they're like, we'll have to omit that one. Any sort of system that means that people will get taken care of, that the rich have to pay more taxes, like that just gets so quickly shot down in America. It's actually kind of funny just how much people want people to suffer. But the thing is that she carried on actually reading his work just in secret and not talking to anyone about it. Like, she wrote it in her memoirs as well. So I'm like, good on her, little closeted radical leftist. I mean, it really does just show that even 70 years later, like, we haven't come all that far. I mean, sure, Marilyn could like support President Kennedy, but at the same time, he's like a centrist Democrat up against Nixon. Anyway, back to All About Eve. So Zsa Zsa Gabor, which is a real person, if you don't know this stuff, like, oh my gosh, there's so much more to teach you. And Mr. George Sanders, who you may well have heard of if you're into vintage cinema again. But the thing is that Zsa Zsa hated Marilyn because at a party many years prior, like, he proposed to Marilyn in a drunken state. She just was there like, what the hell, this was one of the first celebrity like parties that she ever went to, but Zsa Zsa just had it out for Marilyn, like hard out. So they were having lunch one day, literally out in public in the common area. She had already like basically eaten, and he was having a salad, like just about to eat, and he got a phone call, and then he basically ran from Marilyn because Zsa Zsa had spies everywhere. The women always get blamed in this when it's actually the men that are just like being the scummiest out of like everyone in this entire situation. So I'm just like, why? I do understand that men are the ones that are in the power, especially when it comes to relationships, and the back then, like, they had all of the power that they could possibly have wanted and were able to just be like, I don't want to look after you anymore, you just need to accept this. And it's like, why? He's the trash one, not Marilyn. She never had anything to do with him. So Marilyn had a lot of thought about like men, or the wolves, because a lot of them basically are. Because like there's 3 different kinds effectively that would constantly approach her. So you've got the straight up ones, which she preferred because they can just bat them off and it's like, water off a duck's back, don't care about you, thank you for not wasting too much of my time. Then there's the second kind that try to like get to you on like this whole moral high ground of like having an intellectual discussion, meanwhile they just really want to get in your pants. And then you've got the third kind, which is the most insidious, like the worst one of all, because they're the ones who try to say that they're out to help your career. They're usually married, but they ask you to ignore the fact that they've got an adoring wife at home. But a wolf is inclined to get very angry if a woman is to make the mistake of falling in love with him, but it would take a rather foolish woman to do that. Men who think that a woman's past love affairs lessen her love for them are usually stupid and weak. Can we just have a round of applause for her? So she had a fascination with studying Betty Grable, kind of to the point that she almost became a stalker, and this worried Betty actually. Marilyn was genuinely just trying to observe and learn because like Betty Grable was like an icon, and yes, they got to work together in a movie later on, which is great. And after all of this time, she decided to call it off with Bill as he was coming out of college, and so he's like, oh, I can marry her now, and it's like, actually wouldn't really work all that well for her career to get married to someone right now. Now the thing is, remember that look? That cold look? So he actually got to be on the receiving end of that as he went to her apartment to pick up some pictures of her, and she was standing just behind luggage, and he just describes this look as being that same cold one that he saw given to Jim all those years ago, and he just drove him wild. Now on to 1950. So now she was living with Natasha Lytess, her daughter and her cook, and Grace Goddard almost became like an unofficial assistant to Marilyn. And Marilyn was also paying the money as well, she wasn't just exploiting a friend. Johnny Hyde loved her so much, but he had a heart condition and wouldn't live a long life, and he just kept on asking her to marry him like constantly. He was one of the few people that understood her, and they had like a really good relationship. It's just it would never be what he wanted it to be, and she was honest with him, just saying, no, I don't want to marry you. But he was persistent, because you know, persistence is just how you chip away and wear a woman down, right? No, obviously not. When he was hospitalized, she dreaded going to see him. 1, it's hard to see people in pain, and 2, because he was just constantly asking her to marry him, because he's like, you have to marry me, otherwise you won't be able to get any of my money. And she didn't care about the money. Like, why would you do that? But people were still trying to pressure her to marry him. Like, even when he was sick in hospital, he still got her a role in As Young As You Feel, which is a movie that you can skip, honestly, like don't waste your time. He died in December and she was honestly beside herself losing him. He was such a great mentor to her and they had a deep affinity for each other. But his family hated her because obviously she was the homewrecker that like tore everything apart. And they tried to bar her from going to his funeral. So she just sat in the back, and then once like everything was over, she just collapsed in tears on his casket. And she fell into a deep depression afterwards, leaving a note of her on her pillow, which was kind of like a will of who would get her possessions effectively, kind of like a sycamore note, if you know what I'm saying. Apparently Lytess actually had to like storm through the door and get a handful of pills out of her mouth. But Marilyn's never confirmed that this particular incident happened, but she did have other instances of this happening. But it could also be really embellished because Natasha Lytess was not above lying about her as their relationship soured. Arthur Miller, part 1. Let's just say I don't like Arthur. So filming As Young As You Feel, she spent most of the time on set just bawling her eyes out, absolutely devastated with what had happened to her dear friend. Elia, I think it's Elia Kazan. So he obviously just wanted to make her feel better because like obviously you don't want people crying on set like all the time. Like doesn't really lead to a very good vibe for a movie that's meant to be as lighthearted as that one is. And pretty soon the two of them became lovers. So he already had a date to a party that he couldn't cancel on because like that's just rude. And so he asked his good old friend Arthur Miller to take her. Yeah. That Arthur Miller, that one. So I was like, okay, fine, sure, whatever. But then he started to catch feelings for her too, even though he's a married man. And also, Marilyn really liked him as well. And she didn't really make this a secret from her current beau, like Elia, either. The three of them would hang out all the time and just get up to high drinks and stuff and just have a really, really good time in each other's company. But like the feelings were growing and becoming even more obvious between Arthur and Marilyn. And so he's like, nah, I need to remove myself in this situation, and he went back to his wife. Also, Elia went and left her, but she was pregnant at the time and she told him that. She suffered another miscarriage. Now, this happened to Marilyn quite a bit because of her endometriosis. Like, I don't know if I've mentioned this yet, but she had terrible endometriosis that just plagued her entire life, meant that she had to have a lot of operations. And she also did desperately want to have a baby. Now, whilst a lot of people think this is a lie, I actually don't think it is because she was sleeping with a liar at the time and they've been going out for a long time, and it's like, this stuff can actually just happen. But when Elia split from Marilyn, he also told her to not live with Natasha anymore and just try and distance herself from her, which is really good advice, honestly, because Natasha is like a vampire. You don't want to be around that leech. Now, she also tried to connect with her supposed father, Gifford, again, because she started to make a name for herself, and so she's like, maybe he'll be proud of me now. And of course, he refused to see her. Like, did we see anything else happening with this? No, I definitely didn't. And she finally, like, this was just like the cherry on top that got her to finally go and get some psychological help. And she also tried to study and attend night classes at UCLA, but the recognition just got like too much for her, and it was constant, everyone, all the time. It's almost a wonder why Mary-Kate and Ashley could have dropped out as well, huh? Very valid reasons. You feel completely unsafe. Natasha Lytess, the acting coach that took advantage of her. So Marilyn was working on this movie called Clash by Night, which is another teeny weeny little tiny part. And she was trying to get Marilyn to act in the way that she wanted her to, as opposed to like what the director wanted. And it's like, excuse me, someone here has their names up here? You don't, sweetie. And also other cast members would just mock the way that Marilyn acted because she wasn't classically trained as an actor. Because, you know, classism exists everywhere apparently. And also they hated the fact that she was more popular than the leads, and it's like, jealous. We can see you green with envy over there, sweetie. Then along comes the movie Night Without Sleep, which then becomes Don't Bother to Knock. Marilyn moved back in with Natasha during this time to be able to quote-unquote perfect the role. And of course, again, during filming, Natasha just kept on turning up, being like, oh no, I'm just directing her from the background, just don't mind me, I'm just undermining your authority. But the thing is, obviously, like, this really annoyed the director, and so he just got her fired entirely, which she was a bit worried about, but Marilyn just was insisting that she'd be there because, you know, that's just what happens when you have people manipulate you all the time and make you feel like you're worthless without them and like you've got no idea what you're doing, which is exactly what Natasha was doing to Marilyn, honestly. Marilyn obviously used her power to be able to get her reinstated again, so that's exactly what happened. Finally, this was Marilyn's vehicle at being able to show that she could act. She definitely can, but no one actually liked her. And the thing is that she was playing an unlikable character. Like, if you've seen this movie, then you'll know that you're not actually meant to like Nell. She makes her understandable as opposed to like this terrible person. Like, you can kind of understand the things that have happened, and she acts in such a way that you have sympathy for her as opposed to just hate her. But yeah, she's not playing like your sort of cheesecake, like dumb blonde role anymore. And then Marilyn did Monkey Business and We're Not Married in 1952. Both are kind of passable, honestly, especially if you don't want to see animal cruelty, because Monkey Business involves quite a bit of that. And she was arriving late to set, which is definitely something that had happened like previously, but was becoming a bit more common now. During the filming of Monkey Business, like, the director for this was a piece of work, like just a terrible person in general. She was having terrible health issues at the time and he did not care at all. He's like, no, you're not allowed to go have surgery at all, like, because she thought it was appendicitis, like the pain level was that bad. He didn't care. He's just like, no, you have to delay this surgery until we're done with filming you. The original Oleg Cassini dress. So let's talk about Monkey Business a bit more, shall we? So can we just appreciate how gorgeous this dress is, right? Everyone agrees? Beautiful, stunning. She was slut-shamed for it. It was her first ever experience wearing an expensive gown, and she'd saved up for it and bought it and was so proud, and then just got slammed completely. Oh, also, she won this when she was getting the Henrietta Award for the Best Newcomer in 1952. Where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio? Well, Joe DiMaggio, as it turns out, was about to come into our story, that much is certain. So Joe actually got a blind date set up because he saw one of Marilyn's pictures and he's like, that's a bit of alright. His friend was like, okay, cool, I'll try and set up a blind date, and so they absolutely did. And it was a group date that they were going to set up. But Marilyn was quite nervous about seeing him because she's like, oh, he's just going to be an egotistical sports star, like, ugh. I don't want to deal with any of this. And because she was so worried about this, she was like, okay, well, I'll just turn up a couple of hours late, and so she did. And he was just sitting there, very, very quiet at the table. Let me just read from her memoir for you briefly. The other men talked him through their personalities around. Mr. DiMaggio just sat there, yet somehow he was the most exciting man at the table. The excitement was in his eyes. They were sharp and alert. So Marilyn was super tired because this was during the filming of Don't Bother to Knock, which is like a grueling movie to like try and get through. And so after an hour of like her barely saying anything, him barely saying anything, and everyone just, like she said, throwing their personalities around at the rest of the table, she's like, it's been an hour, I'm just gonna go. And she gets up to leave, and Joe stands up as well. And so it's like, oh, can I walk you to the door? And he's like, oh, I actually don't have a car. My hotel's not far, would you mind driving me? So she's like, okay, cool. And so then they drive, and she didn't want the drive to end, and he didn't want the drive to end, clearly. And they slowed down to a crawl just as they were getting up to his hotel. I don't feel like turning in. Would you mind driving around a little while? And she was honestly giddy and super excited, but then she's like, I need to play it cool, I need to play it cool. And she's like, it's a lovely night for a drive. Oh, what a babe. And they drove around for 3 hours afterwards. And thus starts their relationship. Now the thing is that initially she was like, I'm not going to go on a second date with him. I just want to, just want to keep it cool. But you know, sometimes it's hard to like stick to your guns, and then they just started going out all the time. She was unsure about him, and so she called up Bill Purcell, her old friend, you know, for some advice. And he told her to go for it. And later on he was actually really regretful of it because he didn't realize just how much of a jealous man he really was. Bit of backstory on Joe. He had an ex-wife, an actress, Dorothy Arnold, and a 10-year-old son called Joe Jr., which is the most egotistical way to name someone ever. Joe Jr. would refer to his Marilyn as the doll in front of his mother, which his mother absolutely hated. Like, it sounds like Joe was a bit hard-going. Like, he wanted his son to be as good as him at baseball. He didn't really care for fame anymore now that he was retired, and his ex-wife had to fight all the time about child support. So it's not really painting the best picture. He seemed to have treated Marilyn pretty well, but like a jealous streak? Well, let's talk. He never wanted to go to parties or award shows or anything with her, basically, and always made her go with like a publicist or a friend or whatever. Like, he wouldn't even turn up to award shows if she won. That's the kind of level of like, that's your life over there, I don't care. I'm sorry, just be a supportive person. But he would go and pick her up from set. So like, for example, he would pick her up from Monkey Business and stuff. Do you remember those naughty pictures from before? This is where they actually come and like bubble up to the surface again and just start to ruin Marilyn's life. Also, they thought they would. There was even a random guy that came up to her and was just like, these should be worth a lot of money to you. Maybe I should show these around town, just proffering her like illicit pictures in front of her. Mister, I'd just adore for you to show it around Hollywood. Would you like me to also autograph it for you? Like, the gumption, just, I love it. I'm so here for it. Oh my god, so here for it. And remember before how I told you that she's stubborn, so like she never denied these pictures. She never actually wanted to deny them, because it's like the reasons that she took them was out of desperation. And this was in the 50s, so like anything scandalous was like wearing a bikini. Even wearing more than a bikini was scandalous in the 50s, but nude pictures, oh my goodness, even more horrific. So she's just like, well, why should I be ashamed of this? This is my body. I needed something. They paid. What's the matter? Same as sex work today. Same as any work you do today. It's a form of exploitation no matter what you're doing. So hey, what does it matter if you're getting paid for it and you're actually wanting to do it? My god. But then, you know, people started trying to put her face on paraphernalia, and she did not like that at all. And she went about shutting it down. It seems to me I should have some say in how my picture is used. My gosh, she'd be horrified if she saw all of the things that people have like slapped her face across today. Wow. Now, she had to have her appendix removed, and she had to write down who her next of kin was. And this was really a huge issue for her, because she's like, I don't have anyone. A quote from her: "It was just so strange and awful to realise I didn't have anyone to call on. But of course, I've always been alone, and I always will be alone." Now, you and I both know that technically she wasn't really alone, right? She just kind of felt it because she felt like there weren't any people close to her that she could trust. So for example, she had Bill Purcell, who was one of her dear old friends, but he was married now in Las Vegas. And she'd only just started dating Joe, and Aunt Anna had passed away, her sister Beatrice lived on the other side of the country, and her mother really wasn't well. And also she had Grace, but Grace had like a myriad of health problems, and she wouldn't want to burden her as well. So it's like, who would she have once you've taken away those people? I mean, like, Johnny Hyde has passed away. Like, she has no one. I fully understand why she would feel this alone. But also part of me is like, well, is some of this self-sabotage at the same time? Because if you say something and you think something enough, it can kind of become true if you're acting that way. Looking back at her life, it does feel like she did try and push people away as well, as like a form of self-preservation. Because she was so scared of abandonment herself, it's easier to abandon others, you know, so then at least you have a bit more of the power back. While she was in hospital, a movie executive just started tumbling into the room, just like, oh my gosh, Marilyn, they're going to expose the fact that your mother's not dead, ah! And so she's like, oh god, like just getting, like, recovering from surgery, from appendicitis, like from having an appendix removed. That's not easy. And so she's like, okay, fine, I will prepare to speak. And she said that she never lived with her mother, and she hid her identity to like protect her mother because of her ill health. That makes sense. That's completely logical. Why why would anyone have a problem with that? And actually the public saw her side. Of course, we need to remember, like, this is in the time where, again, mental illness was one of those like super scary things. Oh my god, the worst thing ever. It's like Psycho. So the public took her side, and they were just like, oh, poor thing, okay, she wasn't technically an orphan, but oh, what a tough upbringing anyway. And so like she got the sympathy from them in the same way that she got the sympathy and understanding for what happened with the calendar as well. So wow, two winning fronts with that, and both of those are actually like mammoth when it comes to public perception. So super impressive work. I don't know if that was down to the fact that Marilyn was so endearing, or down to the fact that the publicist did such a good job. In 1952, she went with Joe to try and connect with her supposed father, Gifford, again. Okay, so they drove there, right? And she's like, okay, I've really proven myself now. I really want to like go and let him know who I am. She didn't want anything from him. She just wanted to know who he was and like have a relationship. She just got turned away, and up until his dying day, he's just continued to say, nah, it definitely wasn't me. I'm definitely not her father. When it comes to people like this, he was effectively a sperm donor, if he even was her father, and that's really it. The less time you spend thinking about the people that cause you pain in your life, the happier you'll be. The only good thing that he could have really done would be to give her money that she needed to be able to get therapy to deal with all of the damage that had been done from her upbringing, which was in part to do with him if he was indeed her father. That's really the only thing you need from people in your life that are terrible. Then to just give you money so then you can pay to like help yourself, you know? And then she went to renegotiate her contract with Fox in 1952. Now, she was not really the best at managing her money because like she just wanted to make sure other people in her life were well taken care of, and she wanted to be able to learn as much as possible. So it's like all of the acting lessons, dancing lessons, singing, everything. Because especially if you've been raised in poverty, like what role models do you have around being able to manage your money better? Like, yeah, you've got like extreme budgeting maybe, that's if they're even open and honest about this stuff, but it's almost like there could be like a sort of system of education where you can get taught about real life skills that, you know, everyone needs, but then they suddenly expect your parents to be able to pick up on this. We don't know the mental fitness, financial fitness of anyone's upbringing, so it's almost like there could be a system where this could be included in the educational setting. But no, instead we have math problems which are around about like having 101 bananas, 32 llamas and 74 fish. That's helpful. Why do you think we end up in these terrible predicaments, huh? Education system? Fox actually offered to pro-rata her money and just give her a small amount of it, and she's like, no, she never asked for it. So I'm really glad that she like stood her ground and was just like, I'm not having any of this. Like, she was a pretty shrewd woman. Like, she didn't know a lot of things, but also we all don't know a lot of things, myself very much included there. But one thing she did know is when the wolves were trying to take advantage of her. So here is the break for part 1. We're going to go on to part 2 next time. Hopefully you've been enjoying so far. There is so much more to talk about, so much more. Oh my gosh, so much more. We're down to, this has been 15 pages. I don't know how long this is. The next section is 15 pages too. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next Tuesday with part 2 of this. Oh my gosh. I'm dreading how much work this is going to be to edit, but I really do hope that you're enjoying it so far. Like, there is a lot of love poured into this, which I hope that you can tell. Anyway, let's jump on to next week.